Just 70 hours till baseball season here at FUV. MLB opening week is upon us in New York and beyond. Joe Henry, joined today by Grace McCarron and Brendan Shorey. We are your Mets beat reporters for the 2025 season. Live game updates, player and coach interviews, video previews, and recaps. We will quite literally be on the field for you guys all year long on behalf of FUV Sports. We've got our Twitter handles on the screen right now. I've got them plugged into the graphics. Shoot us a follow on those to stay up to date on these Mets all year long. We'll also have content coming your way on all of WFUV Sports' socials, so make sure you're following us wherever you get your baseball news. Guys, this is a Mets team that carries with it as much hype as any club in baseball and any Mets team in recent years. Just how excited are you to get down to Flushing and to Citi Field?
Yeah, super excited. When I got the Mets job, I was honestly more excited than if I got the Yankees one, just because of the hype around this Mets team this year with the big signing with Soto and a lot of these underrated guys, kind of under the radar guys that also went and got to deepen out this team. But yeah, super excited to get there. Baseball season's right around the corner. Couldn't be a better time.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I think this is going to be a really fun season. Even if it doesn't end in like a World Series trophy for the Mets, I think they're going to have it's going to be a really fun team. It's going to be really fun to see how things shake out with them. And as you said, Joe, this is one of the more like anticipated Mets teams in recent years, at the very least. So it'll be super exciting to see what they can do. We'll have a front row seat to all of it.
Absolutely. We'll have to wait a little bit. Mets starting the season on a mini road trip heading to Houston on Thursday for an opening day tilt with the Astros. They'll be there for 3 games, and then they'll head over to Lone Depot Park for a 3-game stint against the Marlins. And then your home opener will come April 4th against the Blue Jays. I'm in London this semester, so I'll be on the IL until May probably. So either Grace or Brendan will have you covered for that game and for this next month of Mets baseball. This Mets team able to retain most of its core this season, able to get a few guys healthier than they were last year, dealing with some newer injuries to begin the year. And we'll talk about that, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't immediately mention the single biggest offseason addition by any team in baseball this year and in recent memory, the Mets inking Juan Soto to that 15-year, $765 million deal.
Yeah, they paid him for sure, and we saw what he did with the Yankees last year, and we saw what he's done throughout his career with the Nationals, with the Padres, and he's still a super young, budding superstar. And to be able to go and grab a guy like that to add to a team where the offense wasn't the problem last year, and you're bringing in a guy with a bat that powerful is going to go a long way for the Mets this season.
I feel like it's kind of like you can't even really fathom how big of a move this is for the Mets until he's out there on Thursday in Houston for them. Like it's the kind of move like to change a franchise, not even like even if they don't win the World Series immediately, like just the size, it's the biggest contract in sports history. Just the what it means for the franchise and what it says to the rest of the league is so important. And it's really like alongside Alonso, alongside Lindor, etc. Like it's just going to be so fun to see him in a Mets uniform and see what he can do. And you said it, Brendan, you saw what he did with the Yankees last season. If he can do any semblance of that with the Mets, I think it's going to be a lot of fun and he's going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, and there's also beyond the stat sheet and what he brings to the field, it feels like a guy the magnitude of Soto brings about such a cultural shift with your team. Obviously, Jose Iglesias is gone. A lot of the magic from last year's Mets team, hard to see, if Grimace is going to be back in the stands this year. But if you bring in a guy like Juan Soto, talk about an immediate revitalization to your clubhouse and to your fan base. Can't think of a time in recent Mets history, probably in our lifetimes, when there's been more buzz and excitement around a season. Otherwise, in the offseason, beyond the Juan Soto signing, Mets not too active, got some pretty solid additions. They added Jose Siri, Frankie Montas, Griffin Canning, Clay Holmes, AJ Minter, Nick Madrigal, Max Kranick. Some names to watch out for, but I think headlining that group, at least as far as opening day is concerned, it's your opening day starter, and that's Clay Holmes. Just 4 career starts heading into this season. He's transitioning out of the pen where he was for the Yankees. This is his first year with the Mets, and he gets the ball day one. And I think if you told us that 3 months ago, it would seem pretty crazy. But if you look at the numbers in spring, he's got a .93 ERA in 19 innings, 23 Ks versus 8 walks. Guys, he's been one of the best arms in baseball this March.
Yeah, and I mean, you said if someone told you 3 months ago Clay Holmes was your opening day starter, you would call them crazy because he's always been, at least as of recently, that bullpen role, especially with the Yankees, which I think that's a big aspect too, is combining Soto and Clay Holmes both coming from the Yankees to the Mets is kind of a big part of that culture shift where they chose to come to Flushing instead of the Bronx and what they bring with them from that. And then Clay Holmes coming in first time, if not first time in a long time, starting pitcher coming in and taking the ball for opening day. It's going to be exciting for Mets fans to see.
Definitely the when this was announced, I feel like the reaction was very mixed, kind of leaning towards negative, just because if you watched any Yankees baseball last season, you kind of got the stress that they got out of seeing him come into the game. But I'm not unhappy about it. He's had a fantastic spring, and also just looking at this rotation right now, considering that Manaya and Montas are both a little bit banged up, I don't see like what another option would have been that would have been like a slam dunk over Clay Holmes. So I'm not mad about it. It is a little bit risky. I can see where it could go wrong, but I mean, from what we've seen in the spring, like I'm not mad about it. I'm not immediately like, oh, we're toast or anything. I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think it's probably going to work itself out. We'll have to see how he handles like the new load of innings if he really does go the entire season as a starter, but I think it'll be interesting to see. I don't think it'll necessarily go wrong either.
Yeah, exactly. I think the big thing to look out for with Holmes, this is a 32-year-old who's just now getting into his first full-time starting role. And with that, in order to make that transition, you're going to be going through the order, one or two times more than you're used to. He's added a couple of new pitches this spring. He has a cutter, and he also has this thing everyone's calling the kick change. It's like a 90 mile an hour changeup, sinker, splitter thing that has yielded some pretty nasty whiffs so far. It's going to be something to monitor in opening day and as the month of April goes on, how effective those new pitches are, how he does second and third time through the order. That's a common area where guys moving from the bullpen to a starting position tend to struggle. So that's something to keep an eye on. But still, as you guys mentioned, as crazy as this may have seemed a few months ago, it feels like Holmes is the kind of obvious pick for an opening day starter. If you look down the rotation, and Grace, you mentioned those injuries to Montas and Manaya, the other names don't exactly jump off the page except for maybe one. In order, Mendoza announced the rotation 1 through 5. Holmes, and then you've got Tyler McGill, Griffin Canning, David Peterson, and Kodai Senga. McGill once again finds himself in the rotation to begin the year. Somehow this happens every year. Um, Peterson has been a steady presence. Griffin Canning was one of the worst starting pitchers in baseball last year, but he's really turned it on this spring. And of course, Senga still recouping from that injury. Of these 5 guys, which do you think is the most to prove, and which are you maybe the most eager to see on the bump this spring?
I'd say most to prove would be McGill, just because of the fact that he seems to always find himself in this situation where he's kind of a rotational guy in and out of the rotation, starting the year with barely making the cut every year. But if he's coming out and he's able to make a big impact in that 2 spot, then I think that's going to be very key in the Mets being able to make a run to the playoffs this year.
I would agree with that, but I am going to go with Senga as the most to prove just because we know what he can be. We've seen it before, but because of the injuries last season, he just did not have a lot to say for last season. And I mean, with the other names in this rotation, there's no like stand out like, oh, that's your ace. There's no like, say, Garrett Cole in this rotation. So he is, at some point you have to wonder like, is he going to be that guy at some point in the season once he gets some innings under his belt? Is he going to be the number one guy in that rotation if, all pans out as we hope it does? But I would say it's him. Like we know, as I said, we know what he can be. I think he could be the ace of the staff considering the other names. but we just have to see it because we just don't have a lot to go off of, especially from last season.
Reports indicate that Senga is going to be held to 65, 75 pitches to start out, but Senga set a goal for himself to pitch 162 innings this year, which is the requirement to qualify for the major pitching stats. So interesting to see how his health plays out as the year goes on and how effective he is coming off of injury. For me, I think it's Griffin Canning. He had nearly a 6 ERA last year with the Angels, but he's been electric this spring. His last outing against the Rays, he had 9 Ks and 4 2/3 innings, 40% whiff rate, 0% barrel rate. Obviously, you can't sell off of one game. He's looked good all spring, but given the track record, you can't be too confident in how he's going to play out. But I think if he's able to play up to even near this standard, that he could have a pretty big impact this year.
Yeah, Canning, I mean, you mentioned it, one of the worst pitchers in baseball last year. I mean, you look at this Mets rotation, basically 1 through 5, and you can make an argument for each of them that they all have a lot to prove this year. It's got kind of built with 5 guys who should be coming out hungry to make a name for themselves or just kind of build their name and their image up. So I can see an argument for all 5 of these guys, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I could also definitely see an argument for Mania once he is fully healthy because he was very reliable last season, but you have to wonder, like, can he continue that in the way that the staff probably needs him to? Because as I said, there's not really one standout ace on the staff. You're going to kind of need some of these to hit, and you're already testing something with Clay Holmes, and a few Griffin Canning as well, a few other guys. You kind of want a sure thing in this rotation. I don't know that they have that at the moment, but like Sean Manaea, if he can be what he was last season, that would be a good option as well.
Yeah, Manaea, the oblique injury expected back mid to late April. Frankie Montas, as we mentioned, will join the bunch eventually, nursing a lat strain. Current projection is that he returns maybe late May or into June. It's going to be a couple hectic months for this Mets rotation in April and May. And it makes things really interesting as you hit the summer stretch when you have this five set in place will be the rotation for maybe 4 weeks. And then Mania will come in, and one of those guys is going to get booted to the bullpen or to the minors. And then you've got Montas coming back eventually. You'd have to think that he's going to be one of the 5 guys in your rotation. You've got Paul Blackburn, who is not going to be in the rotation to open up the year, but was a contender for that spot. You've got Brandon Sproat, who's your top prospect, who's 24 years old at this point. You'd have to think that he cracks the major leagues at some point this season. Just going to be, I don't know, just a lot of names contending for those 5 spots as we head towards summer if everyone's able to be healthy at once. And as you guys mentioned, not a single one of these names is a sure thing to be a starter this entire year. Once Manaea is back, you have to think that that's the guy that ride or die, no matter how poorly he's playing, he sticks in the starting 5 once he's back and healthy. But everyone else, I mean, even Clay Holmes, as good as he is, if he really struggles, you know that he can be effective in the bullpen. So a move back there could occur. And the same goes for the rest of these guys who have not shown steady success or are dealing with injuries, like a guy like Senga. Makes things very confusing. But I wanted to move on to the bullpen. The Mets will get a healthy Edwin Diaz this year for opening day. MLB.com projects him to have more saves than any other pitcher in the NL this year. Paul Blackburn, by virtue of missing the rotation, will be in the pen as well. You've got AJ Minter, the addition, Jose Butto, Reed Garrett, Ryan Stanek, Max Kranick. That leaves one more spot, but that's kind of the obvious top 7. Compared with last year, where do your anxieties rank with this group?
I'm going with the setup role, to be honest. I think you've seen what you can get from Diaz in the ninth, like with the past few years back before his big injury in the World Baseball Classic. He was a completely lights out, arguably the best closer in baseball. He comes and has a solid year last year, but not to the same standard as he was, but pre-injury. But we know what he can do. We've seen what he can do, and so the hope is with the player option coming up, he can continue to do that. So then you look, well, who's going to be that seventh, eighth inning guy that's going to shut him down before Diaz has a chance to come in and turn the lights out. And I think Stanek and Minter right there, those two are going to be the big two in my eyes that have this opportunity to come in and show the league that the Mets have a strong back end of that bullpen.
I would agree with that. I'm not too scared about Diaz. I know it's hard to imagine that he could get back to how he was, like completely, even in Seattle, like before he even joined the Mets, where he was without a question the best closer in baseball, with that under two ERA a few years ago. But I mean, I'm like okay with the bullpen. I don't know. It's not like totally speaking to me. I have some worries. I mean, Diaz is kind of prone to a bad stretch. I will say that. But some of these arms, you mentioned Brendan Ryan, he was decent last year. Reed Garrett's a little up and down. I'm not totally worried, but I'm not feeling like, oh, it's the lights out bullpen. I liked the AJ Minter addition, however, and I'm interested. He's in the minors now, but Daniel Nunez, when he's fully healthy and he eventually comes into the picture, surely they're going to need him. I'm interested to see what he can also provide.
I think the key with the Mets bullpen this year, and what distinguishes it from last year is depth.
Hmm.
We just rattled off, eight guys, but as we mentioned, there's this logjam starting wise. So if you have a couple guys that end up getting booted out of the starting lineup, you have a guy like Clay Holmes who is experienced in leverage situation, then you have other guys who have experience being kind of that long relief role. The Mets have a lot of options in the bullpen, and that's what makes me a little less nervous about that area of the team this year. But I think another area that I don't think anyone is terribly anxious about in a bad way, but maybe anxious about from an excitement standpoint is this lineup. And it'll warrant a close watch because when you read this starting nine, it's just electric. Francisco Lindor batting first, probably for opening day, followed by Juan Soto and right, Pete Alonso at first, Mark Vientos at the other side of the infield at third, Brandon Nimmo would be at left, Charlie Marte and Jesse Winker sharing reps at DH, Luis Torrens starting the year at catcher with Francisco Alvarez injured, then Brett Beatty probably sliding into that second base role with Jeff McNeil out, and then Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor in center. I mean, where do you even start, right? I look at this and I see guys who have some things to prove to me, and we'll get to that, but I also see Soto filling in a Soto-sized gap in that order. I mean, this top half of the order feels money.
Yeah, if you're a closer or even like a late game reliever, you're not gonna want to see the 1-2-3 combo right here from the Mets. I mean, you look at not just like the concept, the pop that they have up at that top of the lineup with Soto and Alonso, and even Lindor who can hit a few. Um, it's a scary top half of the lineup, and I honestly can't wait to see Alvarez and McNeil get back and see them kind of deepen that lineup up 1-6, 1-7.
Yeah, I'm really obviously we have kind of the big three and Alonso, Soto, Lindor on there, not in that order, of course, but I'm really interested to see what Mark Vientos does this year. I feel like he doesn't have a lot to prove. We saw how good he can be last year, but I'm wondering, can he continue that kind of on the same end as Sean Manaea with that one? Like, are we going to see the same thing? Hopefully, it wasn't a fluke because he was great last year and they kind of solved their issues at third base with him last year. But if they have those four guys, Alonso, Soto, Lindor, and Vientos, like that is a really, you said it, Joe, like that's a money lineup. How does that team not like go at least to the NLDS, in my opinion, assuming all goes right?
Yeah, absolutely. But you said that Vientos, you're hoping it's not a fluke. I feel like you listen to some other discourse on him, and people are debating where he ranks among the game's best third basemen. Why do you think that he's not at that level of provenness yet?
Um, I just kind of have like a little, not, I don't have uncertainty about him. It's just kind of a general thing with like when it's one really good year, I do need to see a little more until I'm like, that's like one of the best third basemen in the National League. I mean, if you think about a lot of the other names in the National League as well, they're very much proven. But I think he'll be right there. I don't think he's going to have a little recession or anything. I think he's right there, and I'm really excited to see how he pairs with those other guys in the lineup who have been around a lot longer.
Yeah, but he is part of this kind of bigger log jam in the infield where obviously right now things kind of slide into place well with McNeil out, but when he's healthy, you have to figure that he's going to be your everyday second baseman. Then where does Brett Beatty go? He's been the hottest hitter in baseball this spring. You know, somehow that happened. And you think all of a sudden after Mark Vientos usurps that role at third base last year, and Beatty kind of goes to the wayside, doesn't really get an opportunity in the big leagues, even as young as he is. Now you figure that he's a guy who needs to be getting reps. And that's not even to mention a guy like Luis Nel Acuna, who figures might make the opening day roster. Probably not going to start or get a lot of reps if he does. But that's another guy who's playing, middle infield where there's just so many guys competing for only so many spots.
I think you're going to see, or what you could see a lot of, is a lot of variety with the DH spot, and even out in the outfield, mixing it up. Like I think you could have at that DH spot, you could have guys like Winker. You could throw a Marte in there, a Siri in there. You can rotate Soto and Pete Alonso into that DH spot and open those spots up as well, and kind of figure out ways. Like it's like a little puzzle this year for the Mets with finding a way of how to get all these guys reps, how to fit them all in, and it's a good problem to have because that means you're going to end up giving a lot of your best players, you're giving a lot of these guys some good rest.
Yeah, on the topic of Brett Beatty, I still have some uncertainty about him just because I feel like every year it's the same story with him. He has an amazing spring. And then he gets to the big leagues and he can't capitalize in the same way. And obviously, like with this kind of team that the Mets are putting together, that I think absolutely is contending for the World Series, like I don't know if you want to take those kinds of risks with your lineup when you don't. I mean, right now it works out nicely, as you said, Joe, because of McNeil's injury, but like when you don't need to be taking those risks, I don't know that you want to do that. So I do need to see a little bit of him, breaking out early when he's getting this opportunity in the big leagues. He's going to probably be on the opening day roster. Like you need to see it early from him just to say like, hey, I'm not just a spring training star.
Absolutely. I think April is kind of the litmus test for a lot of young guys. I know, from my Red Sox fandom, the Red Sox have had a lot of young talent over the past several years, but every time a rookie comes into the league and he makes the opening day roster and he fills this gap to start, he has a terrible, terrible April. So I think it doesn't mean it's not indicative of their entire career. It doesn't mean that they can't bounce back from that. But when McNeil's out, Beatty is essentially playing for a starting spot. So we can't afford to have that slump that a lot of young players have to begin the season. He really needs to play well in order to retain a spot in, the everyday or near everyday lineup.
Especially with a lineup. I mean, we've already mentioned it, but that has so many options to go in this infield and especially up in the middle infield. A lineup that has that many options, you really have to establish yourself as a name that can go in there and take an everyday spot and be able to be consistent and deliver every single day. And he has time to do that with McNeil, as you mentioned. And if he's able to come in and do that and make a name for himself and show that he can be a consistent contributor to this team, I think that would help and go a long way towards earning himself a spot on the roster longer term.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what you said, Joe, about April being the litmus test for a lot of these guys. Like that is this is kind of his golden opportunity. Obviously, it sucks that it had to come with an injury, but this is his golden opportunity to prove that he's not just like a triple A guy. Because we also see during the regular season in triple A, he does very well, and then he gets to the big leagues and it's the same thing. And like then spring training is amazing, same thing in the big leagues. So you have to kind of seize this moment when it's given to you. And if he really does and he performs like how he has in the spring, I mean he's leading the Grapefruit League in OPS, so you can't really ignore that. But you have to see it in the big leagues. And then if he does continue this in April, then Carlos Mendoza is gonna have some decisions to make at second base.
Good decisions to have to make, though, right? Those are a lot better problems than the problems that the Mets have faced in Aprils of years past. And really, with a lot of players like Beatty,
Yeah.
projections for their play vary so wildly. You don't know exactly what you're going to get for them this year. There's guys who could break out into superstardom, or they could play so poorly that they end up getting sent back down. You know what you're going to get from, Lindor, Soto, Alonso, Diaz, Minaya, and a few others, but a lot of these guys, for me, figure as potential X factors for this team. Guys that are equally likely to fall out of a starting spot as they are to break out and have an all-star season. Is there anyone on this Mets lineup or even on the pitching staff that you see as an X factor this year?
I'm taking a look at Jesse Winker. I think he was a good addition to bring in. I think you look at how flexible he is in the field, where you can use him. You can throw him in the outfield. You can DH him. You can throw him over at first and give Alonso a break. I think the ways they are able to use him in the field, combined with you look at how he's performed in the past and recently not amazing, but we've seen what he could do back in his days with the Reds, having 3 different years with an average around 300. If he's able to bring that kind of consistency and that kind of hitting, whether there's power or not, if he's just delivering hits on a day in day out basis, I think he could be a huge factor. And I mean that's what the Mets need right now. They need one guy who they don't think is going to step up, who the world doesn't really see shining this year to come up and be a big time player.
I think there's a lot of good answers for this question. Now, in the rotation, I already talked a little bit about Senga, so that would be my rotational X factor. But in the lineup, I'm probably gonna go Starling Marte. He's getting towards the end of the career. He's getting a little bit older. He's faced the injuries, had a few down seasons, but if he could like pull it together, I mean, he doesn't even, he doesn't need to be all-star caliber. We talked about how strong this lineup is, even with those big guys that we know are going to be all-star caliber. But if he is, that's just like another big bat in that rotation that you don't want to face if you're a pitcher.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick for me. Obviously on the aisle right now, but the guy that I look at is Francisco Alvarez. I think that he's someone that Mets fans talk so highly of as someone who has this potential to be one of the great catchers in the league. And he's shown numerous flashes of that, but he's shown just as many big slumps. So when you look at both the underlyings and those, flat out regular statistics, this guy has a career 220 batting average. And yeah, he has some pop, but I just don't think that he's put it together enough to warrant so much security about his standing as the Mets' long-term catcher now. He is 23, but when you look at some of the numbers on the defensive side, he's one of the worst blocking catchers in baseball. He is a really good framer. He has good pop time. He has a good arm. His bat speed's good. His walk rate's good. His K rate, not so much, right? Expected batting average, among the worst in the league. That's 11th percentile in the league. Um, Hard hit percentage is quite good. Barrel percentage, a little bit low, right? It's when you look at some of those advanced statistics, it paints such an unclear picture. And so when he recovers from this injury and gets back probably in late April, I think he's going to have a lot to prove. He doesn't really have guys, Elise Torrens is probably not going to flourish into this everyday catcher role and usurp him as the number one guy. So he's got some job security for this year. But I think going forward, that's a guy where he's really has to come to the plate, both literally and figuratively, in order to prove that he's the guy at the catcher position for years to come. And when you zoom out and look beyond New York, all three of these guys we mentioned in the lineup, Winker, Marte, and Alvarez, will likely need to beat expectations. The NL East is as competitive a division as always. Obviously, there's the Marlins who we'll see just next week. They're expected to be bottom dwellers. The Nationals have had a lot of guys show some promise the last 2 years, but have never really put it together. I'd be surprised if they do this year. The Braves have an incredible roster on paper. Questions about their two best players, really, in Strider and Acuna coming back from injury, and how they'll be able to recover after last year. And then the Phillies, who won the division last year and are more or less bringing back the same squad. It certainly won't be easy for the Mets this year in that conquest for their first NL East division title since 2015.
No, it won't. And you mentioned how stacked these teams are, and it's the division itself. Whether you look at the Phillies, whether you look at the Braves, they've both made the Phillies returning basically the same squad, like you said, but they were a very good team last year. The Braves going out, having key players return from injury, and they're also going out and making moves. They lost Max Fried, but they go in, they bring in Jurickson Profar. They keep relatively similar pitching staff, which was solid last year. They're two teams that have been at the top of that division for a while, and they're always competing year in year out, and they're hard to compete with. Then you take a broader look at the National League as a whole. You find that there are a couple other teams that you're going to have to compete with in wildcard spots, whether that's the Padres or possibly the Cubs or the Pirates, like some of these teams, the Diamondbacks maybe. The National League is a very deep league, but when you look at the division itself, also very deep. So I think whether the Mets win the division or not, there's a wild card spot to play for.
Grace, when you look
Yeah.
at the
Sorry.
Mets
Go ahead.
standings in this division as the NL as a whole, as Brendan was saying, MLB.com has the Mets ranked fourth in the entire MLB this year in their preseason power rankings. But of course, you've got, as Brendan mentioned, the Braves and the Phillies in your own division. And then the Central is loaded with teams that have potential to kind of break out and be contenders this year, but aren't quite that level. Brewers, Cubs, Pirates. Um, who am I missing in the Central? I don't think that the Cardinals are going to be anything special. The Reds, hard to say. And then you look in the West, you've got a number of teams that could be quite good. One of them obviously is going to be quite good in the Dodgers. The Padres are perennially among the best teams in the league as well, at least in the regular season. And you've got a team like the Diamondbacks as well, and a team like the Giants that have sneakily gotten better this offseason. One, when you look within this division, where do you expect the Mets to place? And then two, as you look outwards, you look at some of these wild card contenders, teams that you're going to be competing for seeding wise. Just where do the Mets fit in this mix?
I would say there's seal. I mean, well, I think they're more than capable of winning the World Series, but just knowing that the Dodgers are always there is a little bit scary. I think they can contend for the division. I'm a little bit worried about them winning it, but we saw what they can do as a wild card team last year, and I mean, you said the Phillies are returning basically the same squad. The Mets beat the Phillies last year in the NLDS. So I think they are capable of knocking off either team. It's not going to be easy though. Like this is not by any means a cakewalk to either the division or the World Series in the way that I think the American League is a little bit closer to. There's a lot of deep teams in the National League, and there's always the chance too for like one team to randomly break out. I mean, we talked a little, I don't think the Nationals are going to be, up there this season, but they do have a lot of young guys, and I think they will be the next couple of years. We could see them reach that level of, breaking out and becoming something, and you just never know when that's going to happen for a team as well. But I mean, the Mets are right there with pretty much all these teams. I would say the Dodgers are without question the biggest concern. Just because on paper they're absolutely the deepest. I mean, we could go for hours naming these star players that they've acquired. Um, I'm worried about their ability to take them down. I'm worried about anybody's ability to take the Dodgers down, but you just kind of have to see how things shake out. Like obviously, come October, things could look very different depending on like injury and who, doesn't do that well this season. But I think they're all right there with each other, and it's going to be a really interesting National League. And I do think the Mets can contend with any team.
Brandon, when you look within the division and then more broadly, where do the Mets rank in the NL East? Do you think that they're the number one, or would you slide them in at two or three? And then looking, zooming out, looking at teams like the Dodgers and the Padres, what's the overall ranking in this National League?
I have them at three in the division. I think the Phillies take the division, the Braves get second, and the Mets will come in third. But I say that, but I also think that the Braves and Mets will be the top two wild card teams. So I think the top three from the NL East will all make it as the division winner and top two wild card teams. So that said, I think they will honestly be better than the NL Central winner. I think you could honestly make a playoff bracket from the NL with NL East and NL West teams only and just forget about the NL Central this year. Um, but in that way, I think there are teams you're going to have to watch out for. Obviously, the Dodgers, a very good team, but as we've seen the past couple of years in the NL, and as Grace kind of mentioned, the Mets went on a big run last year, made it to the NLCS. 2 years ago was the Diamondbacks, made it all the way to the World Series. You're having these teams who are coming out of the wild card round in the NL the past couple of years and making runs. And so who's not to say that can't happen again? October is a it's a fresh start in October. And so you once you get there, you're there, and then it's day one again. So in my mind, whether the Mets finish as a wild card team or they finish as a division winner, you make it to October. It's day one, fresh slate. Now it's time to start playing some baseball again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as you get into the wild card, that's when the season really starts here in the NL, especially for a team as quality as the Mets. Really quick before we wrap, get some quick record predictions in there. Where I'm sitting right now, I'm saying 93 and 69. I think that's good enough for second. I like the Braves this year to be first in the division. That doesn't mean that they're the better team come October, but that's where I see the Mets sitting. How about you two?
I have them at 90 wins, 90 and 72. Basically the same as last year, 89 and 73 last year. Um, I think it's very reliant on this pitching staff if they can stay healthy. If they do, they're winning 90 games. And I hope that's the case.
Yeah, I have 91 and 71, which is what Pagoda projected for them. I think the X factor is going to be the pitching. The lineup we know is going to be good, and I think they can probably put the pitching issues, if there are any, on their back. But if they get the pitching sorted out, they'll be a really, really, really great team.
Ran up against the Zoom time limit there. We almost got it in at the buzzer, but I guess we'll come back, reconvene just for this little outro for you guys. Make sure that you guys know exactly where to go this season for the coverage. As we've been talking about the last 10 minutes, this team, regardless of where you rank them in the NL, they're a contender. And as they contend for that elusive first title since 1986, we're going to have you guys covered. Every Mets home game will be covered by FUV Sports. We'll have exclusive content for you guys on all our socials here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all on WFUV Sports and on our own Twitters as well, which, as I mentioned, are listed here on our video frames. So we'll have live updates, content, interviews from every game. FUV Sports is going to have you guys covered March to October and beyond. For Grace McCarron and Brendan Shorey, I'm Joe Henry saying stay locked in with us all year. Have yourself a very happy opening week of Major League Baseball.